Yes, Star Trek. First Contact has a sequel, and it somehow includes the X-Men. When Star Trek First Contact hit theaters in 1996, it cemented itself as one of the franchise's best films, a tense, action-driven showdown between the USS Enterprise E and the Borg, with Captain Picard confronting his own obsession. It had everything fans wanted: time travel, character drama, and some of the most iconic Borg sequences in Trek history. What no one expected, however, was that First Contact would get a sequel, not on the big screen, but in the strangest of places. A Marvel Comics crossover miniseries where Captain Picard, the Borg, and even the X-Men collide. Yes, it's real. And yes, it's as bizarrely entertaining as it sounds. Star Trek meets Marvel Mutants. In the late 1990s, both Star Trek and Marvel were exploring unusual collaborations to expand their reach. Marvel had already published Star Trek/X-Men in 1996, which brought the crew of the USS Enterprise D face to face with Professor Charles Xavier and his team of mutant heroes. The comic sold well enough that a sequel followed in 1998, this time titled Star Trek: The Next Generation/X-Men, Second Contact. The second contact of the title wasn't just a clever play on words, it was a direct continuation of Star Trek First Contact. Instead of dealing with Zefram Cochrane's warp flight and humanity's first encounter with the Vulcans, this comic put the X-Men into the aftermath of Picard's battle with the Borg. That's right, the Enterprise E had barely survived one of its deadliest missions, and suddenly Wolverine, Storm, Cyclops, and Jean Grey were along for the ride. The Borg versus the X-Men. The central hook of Second Contact is delightfully absurd yet perfectly comic book. The Borg, weakened but not destroyed after the events of First Contact, encounter the X-Men. The assimilation of mutants is too tempting for them to resist. Imagine Wolverine's healing factor or Jean Grey's telepathy turned into Borg weapons. Naturally, the Enterprise crew and the X-Men have to form an uneasy alliance to stop the threat before it spirals into galactic catastrophe. And here's the wild part, it kind of works. Seeing War fight side by side with Wolverine feels like the crossover action fans secretly dreamed about but never thought they'd see. Picard, himself still haunted by his past assimilation as Locutus, shares a surprising kinship with Xavier, another leader carrying the burden of guiding his people in a world that fears them. The parallels between the Borg's hive mind and Xavier's telepathic communication with his team even get explored. It's campy, yes, but the comic finds just enough thematic overlap to make the mashup oddly satisfying. Picard and Xavier, leaders of their people. One of the joys of Second Contact is watching Patrick Stewart's two most famous roles, Picard and Xavier, essentially meet each other on the page. While Xavier himself doesn't directly acknowledge their uncanny resemblance, the narrative leans into the similarities between them. Both are principled leaders who use intellect and diplomacy before violence. Both carry trauma from past failures, and both wrestle with the morality of guiding younger, more reckless followers. It's a moment of metafictional brilliance. Before Stewart ever donned the bald head and wheelchair for X-Men on film in 2000, the comics already recognized the spiritual overlap between these two iconic figures. In many ways, Second Contact is the proto-crossover of Stewart's career, foreshadowing his dual legacy as both Starfleet captain and mutant mentor. Why the sequel works and why it doesn't. As a piece of Trek canon, Second Contact is, of course, completely unofficial. Nothing in the comic has bearing on the mainline story of Star Trek, The Next Generation, or the film continuity. But as a crossover event, it thrives in the sheer joy of throwing beloved characters together. Where it succeeds. The Borg are a natural fit for Marvel-style action, raising the stakes in ways that align with both universes. The X-Men's powers give the story fresh ways to explore assimilation. Could the Borg adapt to mutant gifts? Would mutants resist the hive mind differently? The character interactions, Worf and Wolverine's gruff camaraderie, Troy and Jean Grey's psychic parallels, feel fun and organic. Where it falters. The plot is thin, mostly a series of battles strung together with minimal world building. Fans looking for serious exploration of First Contact's aftermath won't find it here. It's pulp entertainment more than Trek philosophy. The crossover leans heavily on spectacle, sometimes at the expense of the deep moral questions that define Star Trek. Still, The fact that it exists at all makes it a fascinating artifact in both Trek and Marvel history. A glimpse into an alternate franchise future. Looking back now, Second Contact feels almost prophetic. Just 2 years after its release, Patrick Stewart would debut as Professor X in X-Men 2000, bringing his